Hi, everybody. It's Deirdre Fay, and I'm thrilled to be here with Diana Hill, who is an expert in ACT. And ACT is an incredibly well-known, world-famous modality, therapeutic modality, acceptance commitment therapy. And I wanted to talk to Diana because she has a new book coming out with Debbie Sorensen where they really explore it. And the best part about it is they give you really practical practices. And that makes all the difference. It's one thing to get it in our heads, but until we really get it in our hearts and our bodies, our lives don't change. So I was thrilled to read it, and I got an advance copy, which I loved going through. So, Diana, thank you so much for coming and being with us.
Well, thank you for having me. And I love talking about ACT. And I also love to talk about in the context of compassions and embodiment. So you're the perfect person to discuss ACT with. And really what Debbie Sorensen and I were looking for when we went on this venture of writing a book together was we were both therapists that use ACT in our lives. And we wanted to be able to translate this technology that's been sort of in academia and also can feel really complicated to folks, to
Yes.
people's day-to-day living like we do. And that's where the book came about.
Well, let's dive in then. There were three components of the book that I really valued. One was the enormous number of practices that you gave that were really just basic, practical, and everybody could dive into. So there's that. And this piece around psychological flexibility. I'm looking at my notes as I go because there was so much jam-packed. I wanted to have notes here. Psychological flexibility, and then to go through and talk about some of the core ACT processes, because I think that helps people understand if they don't know about what ACT is. So why don't we start with psychological flexibility and why that's so important?
Yeah, so just to define the term in a way that's relatable, psychological flexibility is being able to continue to pursue what you care about, even in the face of all the difficult stuff that shows up under our skin. So things like difficult thoughts, emotions, sensations, and memories. And we've all had that experience where we're going through our day and we get flooded by the stuff that shows up under our skin. And I know that you have a lot of practices around embodiment and self-compassion with those. What psychological flexibility adds in is this component of also knowing what your values are, what's most important to you, and how to turn towards your values even in the most difficult times. For many of us during this pandemic and during a lot of the challenges that have shown up in our lifetimes, we can see the times when we've been inflexible and shut down or gone into avoidance versus when we're able to be flexible, open up, and turn towards what matters. And psychological flexibility in the science just pans out to be a huge predictor of a number of things like effective parenting practices when you're psychologically flexible, athletes they're using these processes with to improve athletic performance, but also well-being like depression and anxiety and our relationships. So it's really beneficial across a number of domains, but learning the skills of how to become more psychologically flexible takes, there's sort of 6 core processes that Dr. Debbie Sorensen and I go through to teach how to do that in your daily life.
Tell me more.
About the 6 processes?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's actually how we lay out the book is, well, we start the book with the foundation, sort of like if you're a gardener, you want to start with good soil. Nothing's going to grow. I'm a gardener and I know a lot about putting the chicken poop in the soil and digging it in. And the foundation is self-compassion and self-care and intentional use of time and physical self-care, right? But the 6 core processes of psychological flexibility are sort of like, if you can imagine, one of the metaphors I talk about in the book is painting the Golden Gate Bridge. And my dad is a storyteller, and he used to always tell me the story that when you get to the end of the Golden Gate Bridge, when you're done painting it, you have to turn around and start all over again because the paint's already peeling off on the other end. I don't think it's a true story, but it was helpful for me because, I got this sense of like life keeps on going on and on and on over and over again, and we face the same number of problems. And if you were to paint the Golden Gate Bridge with these 6 processes, it would look like this. The first process would be painting the Golden Gate Bridge and being present while you do it, being in your life while you have your life. That's the first one. And then the second one has to do with taking perspective from time to time. you're in your life, but look around, take a grander perspective, a grander view of your life, as well as take perspective on yourself. The third one has to do with values. How do you want to paint this thing? What's important to you when you're painting? Who and what matters to you while you're painting this bridge? And then the fourth one has to do with our thoughts. What do we do when we don't want to paint? We're sick of painting. We're exhausted. We're bogged down, and we wake up in the morning and it's really foggy, right? How do we handle some of those thoughts? And then the sixth one has to do with committed action. Oh, sorry, the fifth one has to do with committed action, which is continuing to get up day after day, even if it's just small, to commit to what your values are. And then finally, acceptance, accepting that some days are going to be amazing and some days are going to be hard. Some days you're going to be terrified because you're really high up, and being able to open and allow all those experiences. So those are like the 6 core processes, but you can imagine how you would start to use them in your life. Each one in their own is useful, but when put together, it creates what's called psychological flexibility.
It's so interesting and helpful. I know I've heard it, and certainly we use it a lot in meditation, the idea of the pliancy of the mind and being able to move and shift. And I was also thinking about some of my colleagues that do martial arts and how they work with that movement so that they can pivot more easily. And in some ways, that's what you're talking about, is things are going to go wrong, and how are we going to be with it, whatever the case may be. And I was thinking specifically when you were talking about people who get really depressed or really get anxious,
Mm-hmm.
and how to help them have that kind of psychological flexibility. And how would ACT be helpful in that way?
Yeah. Well, there's a number of different avenues in. So if we think about those 6 processes, and then I like to add in compassion, because I believe that's sort of like the umbrella under which all those processes live. But if we think about those, you could enter in a lot of ways. So say you're depressed or anxious, most likely your mind is part of that situation. And your mind is when you're depressed, you have a lot of self-critical thoughts, or maybe a lot of ruminative thoughts. If you're anxious, you tend to have a lot of future oriented thoughts. And so you can work with cognitive diffusion to help you with your thoughts. And what cognitive diffusion does is being able to step back a little bit from your thoughts and seeing your thoughts as thoughts rather than as an inner dictator or drill sergeant in your head. One example of that may be, say you're really feeling depressed, and one of your core beliefs about yourself, or a thought that keeps on coming in, is I'm worthless. I haven't done anything in my life. I'm never going to do anything in my life, or I don't measure up, right? Those are some of the feelings that people may have with depression. And you can imagine those thoughts written across your hand. And then Deirdre, you can do this with me right now. If you imagine like your worst self-critical thoughts written across your hand, and then hold your hand up really close to your face. How well can you focus and see your hand?
I love that. Right.
Yeah, difficult, right? To see any
Right.
focus. And then how well can you see me when your hand's up to your face?
Well, I have to kind of peek around. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe depression's like this sometimes, or anxiety is like this, right? That's
Mm.
all we see. And then slowly move your hands away. And now you can see your self-critical thoughts in your hands, and you can see me. And what I didn't do there was strap your hands behind your back, or cut off your hands, or try and like write over it with a Sharpie, like some positive thoughts. But what we did is just got a little space from them. And that's one
I
of the
love that.
processes. Yeah. Is getting a little bit of space. So you can do that in a lot of different ways. You can do it by writing your self-critical thoughts with your non-dominant hand on a piece of paper. And in ACT, they do all sorts of silly things like sing thoughts, or say, just thank you, mind. That's my mind telling me this today, but I'm going to still continue to move in the direction of what matters to me. That would be an example of how you'd use an ACT process with depression or anxiety, or just, I want to start a yoga practice or an exercise program, and every morning my mind tells me, I don't want to.
Never happened to me. Just saying.
Yeah. Like every morning when my alarm goes off, I say to my mind tells me, now I don't say it. My mind just automatically does it. Says, I don't want to. And so we use that with our thoughts to get a little bit of wiggle room, but then we can also tap into our values and our heart space, which is more in our body, right? Who and what we care about, and use that as what moves our hands and our feet, not always our heads. So in our body, there are things that really matter to you, that are really important to you. And those are our values. And what's interesting about values is they're also often really closely linked to what's most painful to you in your life. So for someone with anxiety or depression, I'm actually going in and look at the shadow side of the anxiety and depression, and that will tell me a lot about the light, right? So as a tree casts a long shadow, there's also a light that's on that tree. And we don't want to cut down the tree or get rid of the light, but rather being able to go into and understand the shadow and the difficult things that are showing up for us and how it is a representation of what matters most to us is another part of it. And that's some of the deeper work, I think, of ACT. And we do that a little bit in the book, right? We talk a little, Debbie and I talk about our day-to-day foibles, but we also talk about some big things that have happened to us in our life or mistakes that we've made. And I also think it's important that we have a willingness to go there, because when we shut off the shadow, it shuts off the other parts of our life,
Everything.
like the light, everything. Yeah.
Mm. That's so nice. And I really like that in your book, how you two were so real and authentic. And it's not like it didn't feel at all like there's something wrong with any of us if we've got a problem, because you've got it all together and you have it figured out. It felt like we're really in it together. And I know how meaningful that is for people as they're doing their healing journeys, to feel like that we're in it together, that there's nobody better or worse.
Yeah. That's part of the common humanity part of, I think, ACT, but also um, the model with which this was developed was what's called transdiagnostic, which means it wasn't like this is a treatment for anxiety or this is a treatment for eating disorders, but rather this is an approach to living that will help you live better.
Mm.
And one of the things that Steve Hayes often talks about, who's a founder, co-founder of ACT, is the ACT is not about feeling better. It's about getting better at feeling. And when we can get better at feeling in our lives, then we have more, just ability to move about in this world, because the world is full of feeling. I mean, if we haven't learned that yet, it's like the term, when is the next shoe going to drop? It's like, I got like every shoe in the closet coming from the sky right now. And being able to feel that, but continue to pursue who you want to be on this planet requires a lot of skill. And I don't think it's easily done, but it is something that we can practice and learn.
Mm.
Yeah.
So beautiful. And you're so articulate about it. Um, I'm looking at my notes again and thinking about how important it is that you stress practices, that we can't make changes, don't come out of the blue. We always hope they do, that there'll be some sudden lightning strike that changes us. But it's really the daily practices that make a difference over time. And you guys bring that to light so beautifully. Um, if I look at it, you looked at compassion, how important that was, about pausing from time to time to take in the view, the perspective piece that you're talking about, um, making room for discomfort when things get boring, hard, or scary. And, for many people, especially now, I'm surprised at just the number of people, not surprised, I shouldn't be, because I am too, the number of overwhelm, things that are there. In the US, there's certainly the unrest that's happening along with COVID. And around the world, there certainly is all kinds of other things. How you hold your thoughts lightly when you're discouraging or helpful, unhelpful. And that's, I was thinking how hard that is when we're in it, and why that's so important to have the perspective. So as I was going through this, I was like, gosh, this is so helpful. And how you have a writing practice, you have a try it out. You really are, I don't want to say scripted, because it's just a little nudges, like, here, give this a try, give this a try. And I thought that was such a beautiful way of addressing a book and taking somebody's hand as you go through that.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think it really came from, I think for me, it's over time, it's how I'm using it in my life and my struggles with it. Like I often tell people I think I'm the most psychologically inflexible person I know, and that's why I sought this out. It's like sometimes the most distracted go to try and find meditation teachings, and for me, it really is it's like in a yoga class. I teach yoga, or I teach mostly kids yoga now, but I would always look for the person that had the really tight hamstrings that couldn't like touch even their knees. I'd be like, that's the person I want to work with. Mr. Flexi over there, the person that can't touch their knees, there's actually something there that could be juicy that we could explore. And so it's
Oh,
in our
cool.
own psychological inflexibility, those stuck places, those places where we're avoiding pain, distracting, numbing out, rushing through, all of these emotional and experiential avoidance strategies that we all do. That in
Mm.
that moment, if we could pause and be in them and see what's in them and be willing to have them, then they won't have us so much. It's like we can have it without it having us.
Mm.
And for me in my own, my own life history and my relationships and all these places where I have found sticky spots, it's been psychological flexibility and compassion that have really been sort of the place that gives me a sense of rooting and direction. And I think that's what we need. And I think we need it to be simple, because when we're stuck, our um, our brains don't really like complicated stuff.
Right. Right. When we're
Like,
stuck, we need very step-by-step
yeah,
ways to get to
yeah,
the other side.
yeah. Like one of the practices that I used a lot was one that I learned from this woman, Anita Johnson, a number of years ago. I used to run a treatment center for individuals who struggle with eating disorders. And Anita is a woman who wrote all this work on metaphor and myth and women and food. And she taught this approach that I like, and I think it's very much how to be present, which is, she says, start with two eyes out. Now, for some of us, we spend most of our time with two eyes out. We're aware of everything that's going on around us, who's doing what, do they like me, do they not like me, kind of that super outward focus. Start there and notice two eyes out. And then try two eyes in. For some people, that's where they spend all their time. you know, it's all about me. Am I sort of could be similar? What am I doing right? What am I doing wrong? Am I in my head, right? Two eyes in. But also, could I also do two eyes into what's happening in my body, two eyes into what's happening with my emotions in here and my breath? Like, you could try that right now. Like, bring two eyes in with your eyes open. You can bring two eyes into your body, put your hands on your body, your belly. And then the real skill set is one eye out and one eye in. So
Mm.
even as we do this interview, how do I stay connected to me and my body, present in this moment? Well, I'm also seeing you and everything that you're offering me to be here. And, it's nighttime there, it's morning here, you had a full day. I can acknowledge you, and then I can acknowledge me. And that's a being present practice of just one eye out, one eye in. Very simple, but we could do that all day long and really benefit from it, right?
That's beautiful, Diana. I love that.
Yeah.
I was also reflecting on the beautiful story you said about the coming out of the parking lot. Do you want to tell that story? I think
Sure.
it'd be better if you tell it, because I just love that one.
Yeah. Well, in addition to being psychologically inflexible, I can also be a distracted driver.
I'm sure you're the only one.
And two eyes in, it's all about me, where I need to get to. I actually think I was in the parking lot of a yoga studio at that time. The editors didn't let me put the full story in there. But yeah, so I'm about to leave this parking lot, and you know how you just rush on through past that sidewalk to get to to try and get out. And I go through, and there's a jogger coming by, and she looks at me, and it's that moment of like, oh, I screwed up. I could have really harmed someone. It's one of those like close calls. And I was ready to get the finger or for her to yell at me. And she looked at me. I rolled down the window, and she looked at me, and she's like, I've done that too.
Oh,
And then it led to me to have this like complete relief, but also I think about her. And I think about that idea of we've all done that too. And actually her gift of kindness to me in that moment was much more effective in me changing my behavior around pulling out of parking lots than it would have been if she gave me the finger or she yelled at me. So then I can think about, okay, how do I do that with my kids? Or how do I do that when a friend makes a mistake and misses my birthday or doesn't call me back? Or how do I do that with work when somebody's, having a hard time and they blow up and have anger, right? I've done that too. I've done all those things. And when we have compassion for others, it allows them to have compassion for themselves. Well, you know all this, and then the compassion can flow right on back. So those three ways of compassion. And sometimes we need other people to be reminders of that, right?
There's something, I keep thinking about that story and thinking about how powerful that is how much it changes the perspective, changes our expectation that the world is going to be bad and harmful. And what would it be like to practice that? What if I gave that kind of generosity of spirit to other people? And then how often then I might receive it in return. But I love that those are the kind of stories that you bring up throughout, you and Debbie, and bring it out. And it's just makes it so a heartfelt book, in addition to learning the skills.
Yeah. It was interesting because over the summer of 2020, Debbie and I actually met. We're friends first, and then we started a podcast together, Psychologists Off the Clock. And then now we have Jill Stoddard and Yael Schumbrun on the podcast as co-hosts. And in the summer of 2020, I was really moved, as many people in the US were moved, to really work on issues of social justice and how that shows up for us as 4 white women running this podcast. And we took a look at the people that we had on, and they were mostly white professionals. We had a lot of women, but mostly white professionals. And I really wanted to make a change around that. It was a real moment of what are we doing here, and how am I very much part of the problem. And so it's also an area that I'm not super confident in. It's really easy for me to interview a Paul Gilbert, studied his stuff, met him, all this, but this is an area that I wasn't super experienced in. And then also high risk, right? In terms of me harming someone, because I don't know, if I don't know, I don't know what my language is going to be in terms of being harmful. So my instinct was just don't do it. And I think we all have had that experience, right? Here's something that I really want to do that's important to me and is scary and way outside of my comfort zone. So I think I'll just skirt this one. And I could do it in a really kind of, I could bring a white person on to talk about white privilege. That would be really comfortable.
Or more comfortable.
More comfortable. I mean, actually it would be uncomfortable, but a little more. And so that summer I ended up interviewing a number of professional psychologists in under the concepts of race and social justice and radical healing. And where this all comes to is I remember being on one of the groups that I interviewed was the psychology of radical healing, which had Helen Neville and Hector Adamus and Grace Chen and Brianna French, all people of color, psychologists that are experts. And there was a moment on the interview where I really said the wrong thing. I really said the wrong thing. And the way that Hector Adamus responded to me was so incredibly loving and kind that it just completely dissolved this, he's an expert. So I wasn't leaning on him to teach me because he's a person of color, but because he's an expert on, race and racism as a psychologist. And so the way he responded to me was so loving. And at the end of the interview, we decided we're not going to cut one bit of this. There was not one cut in that whole interview. Usually we go and clean up things. Nothing was cleaned up. And it was incredibly moving for me to just enter into something that's really scary and do it in a way that is authentic and shows messiness. And, I think that's what psychological flexibility for me is. It's messy. It's not perfect. It doesn't always look good. It looks fumbling. It looks like almost running someone over or making, a microaggression on the air, but that's where learning happens, right? It deepened my learning and deepened my growth, and recognized that here I am painting the bridge. I get another chance. I'm going to be right. I guarantee you, I will be back here again. And now I want to paint it this way, knowing what I know.
So beautiful. I'm thinking about how messy healing is.
Yeah.
I mean, Dan Stern talks about how therapy is messy, and healing the intersubjective relationships are messy. But we don't always, we're not always tender enough around that and give ourselves space. Like, it is messy. And that's where the trueness of life can come. And I so appreciate that you didn't clean up the interview, because then we can all be in relationship and realize, yeah, you did it. You didn't do a perfect job, but so what? Like, that gives the rest of us room to
Yeah.
do the same.
Yeah. I think we're trained to do the perfect job. And so we develop this inner red pen with ourselves. It's constantly doing self-correction. And then we self-correct on the outside as well. And I know that's in there for me, like the inner self-corrector and then the external self-corrector. But I also, I remember Kelly Wilson, who's another co-founder. I have to mention the co-founders of ACT, because this isn't my baby. This was the work of Kelly Wilson and Stephen Hayes and many, many people that have worked together collectively over time. But Kelly Wilson to me said, he said once in a workshop I went to, he said, "I pity the child with a perfect parent, because if you're a child with a perfect parent, how do you go to them when you're struggling and you're imperfect?
Mm,
To
right.
have them understand." So I pity the client with a perfect therapist. I pity the sister with the perfect sister. I pity the friend with the perfect friend, right? I pity the interviewee with the perfect interviewer. Like, that's not the place that I want to live in anymore, because it's caused so much harm in my life. And I see it causing harm in other people's lives. So we got to be messy. It's okay. It's kind
That's
of pretty.
great. Right.
Yeah.
It is. It's so important. And to think about, um, something else you guys said in the book is about how compassion for ourselves when we're making mistakes, and how important mistakes are in our healing and growth. And if we don't make mistakes, we don't grow. But so many of us are harmed by that and told we're wrong or stupid or whatever for making a mistake. And yet, how necessary that is. So the wisdom that's in here in a very organic and heartfelt everyday way is just beautiful. And I cannot wait for the book to come out. Do you know when it will be, Diana? Do we have a
Yeah.
publishing date?
Yeah. It's out on May 1st, but
Okay,
you
great.
can pre-order it. And if you pre-order it through my website, which is drdianahill.com, I have two offerings. One is I recorded a workshop that I did it's like a real workshop, hour and 15-minute long workshop on ACT with compassion. So it goes through some of the compassion focused stuff with ACT principles. And then I
Perfect.
also have just a quick and easy 6 journal questions that you get. So if you go through my website and you pre-order it there, you'll be able to get those free downloads. And that was because we also just wanted people to have some stuff. It seems like kind of a ways off right now that we're recording this in January. I know people may watch this at any time, but it takes, I know you know this, that it takes so long from the time you're finish writing the book for the book to actually hit the shelves. So just to give some things that people could work on between now and then. And then I have a lot of stuff on the podcast, Psychology's Off the Clock, and then just my website, just a lot of offerings there. I'm doing more and more on Instagram, which is something I had not been on as of 3 months ago. I resisted social media for this long, but with the book coming out, they really wanted me to have some place to be able to offer more teachings. And then I also offer a free Tuesday night meditation, whether or not when you're listening to this, whether it'll still be going, but that's through the Mindful Hearts program. I've paired up with them and have some offerings. If you go to my website, you'll see everything that's there.
Oh,
But
good.
lots of places to learn more about ACT and how to use it in your daily life.
And to be with your very sweet spirit.
Thank you. Yes.
Total pleasure.
I appreciate having you taking your time to do this. And I've admired you for so long since we met in Nyack, which just sounds like divine place. We were all together at the Compassionate Minds retreat, and it was spring, and we're all cooped up in one little room together. And I remember that workshop so well. And I remember you leading us through this exercise where you put your critic in one hand and your compassionate self, and you bring them together. And it's one of the exercises that I use the most with the clients that are struggling with self-compassion, because it's so embodied and it's so physical. So thank you for your
Oh,
teachings.
fabulous. Well,
Yeah.
the best part about all this is seeing how we can all participate and everybody just shares themselves and bring themselves forward. And I was just thinking as you were talking about that retreat, how nice it was to actually be in person
I know.
in those
Well,
days. How
we
much
will again. Yeah.
we will
Hopefully.
again. It's true.
Yeah.
So thank you, Diana.
Thank you. So all the way from Santa Barbara to Nice, France. It's good to be with
Just
you.
a hot skipping and jumping. That's the great thing about technology.
Yeah, there's the benefit of not being in person. So thank you for taking the time with me. I really
Glad
appreciate
to,
being here.
Diana. Thank you.
Okay.
So I want